Thank you for that wonderful introduction and wonderful welcome. Oh my goodness. Good evening to the trustees, staff, and scholars. I feel particularly honored to be on this stage today and sharing this space with all of you. I want to extend a special welcome to everyone experiencing a Morehead-Cain banquet for the first time. I hope this can be a marker of the first of many moments of connection and contemplation with your fellow scholars. Hopefully you've already done so already. I've learned that the best way to start is always with gratitude, and thank you, Loazi, for reminding all of us that this evening. So, with that, I want to thank the members of the Morehead-Cain community who believed in me and brought me to this stage today. Thank you to my Morehead-Cain mentor, Robin Hadley, for her endless, meaningful advice. Thank you to my family, and especially my chosen family. I have to mention two scholars who are not in the room today, but were with me from the beginning, Clay Morris and Bailey Benson. Yeah. They challenged me, comforted me, and always cheered me on. Thank you to the professors, Campus Y staff, Southern Oral History Program directors, and everyone else for getting me to this point in my Carolina journey. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the history of this space. The crowning jewel of North Carolina's education system and its surrounding community sits on Native land. North Carolina is home to the Occoneechee, Lumbee, Coharie, Hollow-Isapani, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Meherrin, Tuscarora, Sapani, Waccamaw-Siouan nations, along with other indigenous peoples living on tribal lands and in urban settings. I want to acknowledge and give thanks to the first peoples of this land and their descendants. I also must acknowledge the history of enslaved labor that created this university. There is no Carolina or Morehead experience without both the physical, labor, and capital the university extracted from these enslaved people. I would encourage all of us to take time out of our Carolina journeys to learn more about the realities of our physical space that we have the privilege to learn in and learn from. I know that learning has only enriched my Carolina experience. It also forced me to reckon with the dual reality of this place, one of great learning, but also one of previous exclusion. Understanding both is critical to shaping a better Carolina. So what does it mean to hold two challenging truths at once? To reckon deeply with your experiences and choose the complex rather than the simplistic interpretation, to sit with discomfort and grow from it. Hopefully, by the end of this speech, you'll have a bit of an understanding of how I answer all of those questions. Ideally, my answers will resonate with you, but ultimately, I'm much more interested in what you all come up with. I genuinely do mean that. In fact, when Montez first graciously asked me to be the keynote speaker, I said, "Are you sure? Because I can list at least 6 people who would be better." I proceeded to give him the names, and he shook his head and said, "No, I think you have something valuable to share with this community." So, here goes. At the beginning of this year, the Morehead advising team charged us to lead with curiosity. I know some people in this room heard the term lead in that statement and stopped there. Don't worry, you're not alone. That's a characteristic common in the people in this room and those who are attracted to this scholarship and excel in this space. However, I'd like to focus on the curiosity bit. What does it mean to be genuinely curious? For me, it has always been about people, how people interact, how we support each other, how we malign each other, our capacity to forgive, love, etc. Last spring, I walked into a coffee shop in Cape Town called Sonder that finally contextualized this curiosity. On the wall, they had the definition of the term, and it read, Sonder, a noun. The realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and as complex as your own, populated with their ambitions, friends, routines, worries, inherited craziness, and an epic story invisibly happening around you. It was a concept ever present in my work with the criminal legal system, oral history, and organizing, but I never had an ability to name before that moment. How do you then act when you realize that every person has the same kind of unique, rich, and engrossing life as you? For me, it was a call to listen deeply and learn from the extensive knowledge of those around us. One of the most profound parts of my time at Carolina has been my work with the Center for the American South and the Southern Oral History Program. I've encouraged many scholars to check out the program and would encourage all of you to do the same. It's one of the many incredible hidden resources at Carolina. It took me far too long to find those resources, and I know many of my peers feel the same way. To the younger scholars in the room, and heck, even the older scholars in the room, take a moment There's a vast array of knowledge in this space, right here, right now. Ask the people at your table and afterwards about the wonderful and weird parts of the Carolina experience that have brought them to this moment and every moment afterwards. Take advantage of all of the tucked away resources that people have already found. One of the beauties of oral history is its ability to expand the historical narrative. It prizes the realities of everyday people and their inherent understanding of community care and injustice. Oral history as a practice encourages you to listen deeply to these stories rather than listening to respond. The narrator and ultimate authority in this exchange is always the interviewee, never the interviewer. It is important to note that oral historians are not entitled to these stories. People deserve to be listened to, heard, and recorded. However, they remain the judge of who they tell their stories to and what spaces are safe to disseminate those stories in. Learning to listen deeply in this context has furthered my curiosity and made me a better community member and scholar. Leading with curiosity, I would argue, requires not leading at all some of the time, but rather understanding the depth of knowledge and experience found in the people and places around you. Finding ways to engage with these spaces holistically, respectfully, and sustainably is implicitly added to any charge to lead with curiosity. The next point may be a bit shocking to a room and community as accomplished as this. My biggest hope for all of you is that you learn how to fail. So, if someone had said that to me my freshman year, or even my junior year banquet, I would have, 1, checked out for the rest of the speech, and 2, started mildly hyperventilating. Failure was something to avoid at all costs. So, let me tell you a little bit about what changed between now and then. Within the first week of my junior year, I scheduled a Morehead advising appointment with Julie DeVoe. During that meeting, we discussed taking a gap year between my junior and senior years. I told Julie I intended to study abroad for a portion of the year. I wanted to research restorative justice, work for the DC Public Defender Service, and study the experiences of mixed folks and anti-apartheid activism in South Africa. 2 years later, with a gap year under my belt, I accomplished all of those goals and then some. It's easy to pull one narrative from this story. I articulated goals and achieved them. That, I remained steadfast for 2 years and hyper-focused on shaping the life I wanted with confidence. I understand that interpretation, but it fails to capture the truth of that year. So here's the other piece. For every single goal achieved in every moment of confidence, there was an equal moment of shame and discontent. This gap year was one of the most formative years of my life, but less so because I achieved my goals and more so because I had to navigate moments where I felt lost, where it felt like my dreams were fundamentally out of my reach. In the fall, I faced a series of rejections and a lack of backup plans. The program, which I believed would help me determine if I was going to pursue a career in law, didn't even let me get to the interview stage. I know that seems relatively small and I can brush it away now, but at the time it felt like an invalidation of a career path, a life path, that I'd been working for my entire Carolina career, let alone life. During that time, I had to come to terms with how I dealt with failure and crowdsourced others' experiences. Julie DeVoe kindly shared how, in her experience, navigating career rejection often led to unexpected but more fitting spaces. My Aunt Bernie and Uncle Michael, who may not be relatives but are family, explained how periods of uncertainty in their lives pushed them to articulate their identity, values, and dreams more clearly. But my favorite came from one of my best friends, who I already shouted out this evening, Bailey Benson. Bailey explained that I just had acquired a new superpower. I looked at her dumbfounded. Bailey explained that anyone, or many people, can be successful, but the people who can fail time and time again and yet continue to be passionate, driven, and creative in their next steps are the ones to truly watch out for. Failing well makes you more resilient and more able to relentlessly chase after your goals. If failure is no longer a point of fear, but rather of growth, it becomes easier to try new things, to organize spaces that are meaningful to you and align with your values without the guarantee that other people will show up, to walk into a room where you may feel like an imposter and try anyway. I hope you all find an opportunity to gain this superpower. For those of you who are now counting down the minutes, I have 2 last points for you, I promise. they'll be brief. As someone interested in the criminal legal system and transformative justice, I cannot help but think often about accountability. We are immensely privileged to be in this room and to have access to these resources in this community. Now, as an older and I would argue wiser scholar, Raymond too once said during his banquet speech, "You are not going to single-handedly change the world." Now, he went on to enlighten us about how considering spheres of influence, appreciating community, and chasing personal passions all help cushion that blow. However, I will add that knowing you will not save the world does not absolve any of us from pushing for a better one, a more just one. And that starts in many ways with accountability. As a Morehead-Cain scholar, you are accountable to this community, which also means challenging it to be better. As a member of the Carolina community, you are tasked with engaging deeply with this university in and out of the classroom and forming a more inclusive and generative Carolina experience. As a member of the Carborough and Chapel Hill community, you're accountable to your neighbors who have cherished these and held these spaces for long before any of us arrived at Carolina, and who will hold them for long after we leave. Their knowledge and needs are critical in any considerations we have. As a global citizen with a unique ability to move around the world, facilitated by this scholarship, I'd argue that you're accountable as a representative of both this community and to the people kind enough to welcome you in as a guest. You are charged with integrating what you learn in these spaces about the interconnected nature of the world into your actions going forward. Most of all, you're accountable to yourself, to the person who joined this community 2 weeks or 5 years ago, who is full of hopes, dreams, and curiosity. Take time to carve out points of value and accountability that you won't budge on, and those things that you're still defining. Accountability takes multiple forms, and there are times where being accountable feels like the hardest thing to do. Know that you aren't walking this path alone. Finally, I challenge this community to unabashedly lean into hope and joy. As some of you know, one of my favorite questions to ask people if I haven't seen them in a while is, what's bringing you a bit of joy in your life right now? One of my favorite responses recently came from a scholar in this room, who will remain nameless. He looked me dead in the eye, face lit up completely with a grin, and said, "I bought a new shower curtain." Joy comes from unexpected places and facilitates all the hard work of pursuing curiosity, learning to fail, and taking accountability. One extremely joyful moment came for me last spring and was facilitated by a Lovelace grant. I was able to fulfill a lifelong dream of completing a horseback riding safari and riding across the beach. Felt like a superhero. It's amazing. It was exhilarating, beautiful, and a deeply joyful moment, just for the sake of it. For me, joy is interwoven with the practice of hope. In a world with so much violence and destruction, choosing hope becomes a radical act. Late Archbishop Desmond Tutu says it best. Despair can come from deep grief, but it can also be a defense against the risks of bitter disappointment and shattering heartbreak. Resignation and cynicism are easier, more self-soothing postures that do not require raw vulnerability and tragic risk of hope. To choose hope is to step firmly forward into the howling wind, bearing one's chest to the elements, knowing that in time, the storm will pass. It's important to point out the active nature of that quote. Hope is not something one simply arrives at, but something one must fight to preserve, even in the most challenging circumstances. Hope gives people the will and power to keep going, to keep fighting for that better world, even when it feels impossible. My wish for all of us is that we have the courage to choose hope and chase joy, even when it feels fundamentally out of our reach. Thank you again to all the people who brought me to this moment, and thanks to all of you for patiently listening. I cannot wait to see how each of you goes forward from this space, how each of you wrangle the privilege, possibility, and purpose that the Morehead-Cain can provide. And I sincerely hope that whatever steps you take next are imbued with curiosity, embrace failure, center accountability, and prioritize joy. Thank you very much.